So welcome to my focus group. I'm Louis Hunt, and I'm here to gather your opinions on podcasts. So for the first question, I'd like to gather what are your opinions on having sponsors and advertisements in podcasts and sporting podcasts if you have ever listened to one. Just keep this brief and simple. Just want to gather your thoughts on whether you think it's right to have them or not.
I think you go.
I think they should be relevant to the target audience. They should be relevant to the genre as well. So if you're aiming at an older target audience, you want advertisements that will be suitable towards them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Ruben?
I think, again, make sure it's relevant. And if you don't, you have a high chance of, just your audience not listening to them at all, just kind of zoning out. And also it can bring, negative opinions towards your podcast brand and everything. So I think making them engaging, making them relatable or relate to the audience is vital. And I don't think anyone will think of them positively no matter what you do, but obviously have to support that podcast. So make them, relevant to the audience as much as possible.
All right, Charlotte?
Yeah, I think just having them relevant and makes them interesting, and it makes you want listen to them more. No one's really a fan of sponsors or that many advertisements, but if you're going to have them, make them relatable so that at least they could be interested in them.
All right, Alex?
I would agree with the points there before. I think their placement needs to be very specific. You can't have them happening every 5 seconds. It can't really happen towards the end because most people will just skip them. So I think putting them in the middle or towards the beginning will probably be the best place for them to have the most impact.
Jake, do you have any views on it, on having advertisements?
Sorry, I didn't see it. Sorry, it crashed.
All right. So do you think it's right to have advertisements in podcasts?
Yeah, obviously it depends on the length of the podcast, but I would say, obviously, if it's a very established podcast, I would. But obviously, if it's a newly started podcast, obviously, I would disagree. Obviously, because you don't want to lose the attention of the audience.
Yeah. All right. Next question is, so what are your thoughts on this introduction?
I never enjoyed playing for England for the simple fact is I never played enough. I always find myself defending myself.
But you've got to on this one, Rob. You've got to, because you handed it to him, rounded up in a little bundle and said, there you go.
But that was me winding him up or trying to wind him up.
So if you were being kept out of an England squad by a player that was playing in the Saudi Pro League, you'd be pretty pissed off, wouldn't you?
Of course I would, but I'd also be pissed off if I was kept out of the England squad by players who weren't playing for the club. This might get a little bit of a thing, but Michael was quicker than me.
Yeah.
But every other element of being a striker, I genuinely think I was better.
This is Up Front with me, Simon Jordan. I believe there are a lot of vacuous, uninformed, unchallenged opinions out there. I want to get to the bottom line and cut through the nonsense. So with this podcast with William Hill, I'm going to get people with strong views who think they can stand them up to proper scrutiny. There's a good chance I might learn something along the way, and more importantly, so might you.
So I want to gather your thoughts on what you thought about that introduction. So some pointers. So what are your likes and dislikes? What makes it engaging? What tone do you like? And what do you think about the music?
I think the tone was very I only caught the end of it, so I had to dip out. But it was very sort of masculine. I'm going to cut through all the opinions, the music. It felt very masculine and strong. His opinions are the definitive, and I feel like that would appeal to the target audience, I guess, for an older. If it's with William Hill, it's going to be an older male audience stereotypically, and I feel like that's an effective introduction.
Jake?
I'd say I liked it in the sense that it gives you a glimpse into the interview itself. It wasn't just a guy talking. Obviously, at the end, it actually had him explaining the podcast, introducing the podcast. But I like the way it was a balance. It was it showed you bits of the interview, but also gives you a glimpse of the introduction as well. I'd say the music. I don't really know what to think of the music, to be honest with you. It was intense. and obviously it acknowledged that it's going to have opinions that people don't want to hear, or maybe just wouldn't hear very often. But I'd say overall it was quite engaging.
Elliot?
I definitely think that the presentation, the style of presentation, the introduction itself is very clear. It's very concise. It tells you in that introduction what is going to go on. I think Alex makes a good point with the sponsorship, with the William Hill sponsorship, that it's going to be a much older audience, and so I can see how he's approaching the target audience well.
Okay, Ruben?
I think also from a presentation standpoint, to add on to what Elliot said, I think the way it's done in the opening, without any questions, without any titles, without any introduction, you immediately understand what they're talking about. They pick the right clip to convey what their conversation covers. And also I think the use of music really conveys a very serious and very almost professional tone to the whole thing, and it gives it a certain kind of quality assurance that you know is going to be followed through all throughout.
Charlotte?
Yeah, I agree with Ruben about like professional. I definitely got like more serious tone from it, which is something I think would appeal to the audience which they're going for. The music fit quite well as well. Like it wasn't distracting, but it kind of like quickened the pace of it a bit. And I think that made it quite engaging as well.
All right, next question is, so what are your thoughts on this outro?
That stuff.
Right, listen.
Miriam's face is an absolute picture right now.
The winner, who is going to be taking home a picture of themselves, is Gareth. I mean, yeah, so look forward to that picture of yourself.
I am looking forward to it.
Which you might want to give to your mum,
Where are you
maybe,
gonna-
because
where
she
are you gonna-
listens to the podcast. She'll be pleased, won't she? that you won?
She'll be over the moon.
Yeah. Well, that's it for this week, for this episode, and for this series. You've been listening to the Question of Sport podcast. Don't forget that if you've missed any previous episodes, you can go and catch up on BBC Sounds. And we'd love you to join in on social media with hashtag QOSPod. It just remains for me to commiserate Miriam, Mikey, and congratulate Gareth. I'm Sam Queck, and until next time, that's full time. And I'm sorry that I maybe gave you false hope.
You did give me false hope, so did these two, both picking my story.
So, I want to gather your thoughts on that outro.
I didn't like it. I didn't think it was engaging enough. It's sort of like you had the music building up to it, and then it kind of expect them to go back and just talk, but they just kind of said, "Oh, that's bad. Yeah, that's bad." That's how it ended. There was nothing engaging there with that last little sound bite. I felt like the music building up to it was good. Like the structure's there, it just didn't land. And the tone felt a bit awkward.
Jake?
I completely agree with Alex. I just think it was very boring. I just think it was like, it didn't feel like an outro. It just felt like it was a never-ending cycle of content, and it was like they hadn't finished the major conversation that they'd had. It only really sensed that it was the end when the music came on at the very end, obviously, but it just didn't really seem like a full-on conclusion, and obviously that made it very like boring to listen to.
Elliot?
There were elements of it that I enjoyed and parts of it I didn't. I think the fading in of the music to signify the end was a really good idea, but then you have that conversation, you have that piece of conversation which kind of pulls away from it, and it just brings down the whole outro itself.
Yeah. Ruben?
I think I like how it ends on like a really high note. It brings in a lot of that comedic kind of side of it. It really works well in presenting like kind of how the presenters have kind of interacted throughout the whole episode, kind of gather how they've been. But I do kind of agree with Alex. It is just a little bit boring. There's nothing really to it. It doesn't really feel like an outro. It just kind of feels like a transition in some sort of way. It doesn't feel very like strong and like an abrupt end point that we can call the conclusion.
Yeah. Charlotte?
Yeah, I think the ending could have been a bit more. It kind of just seemed like they were tying up loose ends and weren't really going anywhere with it. I liked how they kind of said like where they can go, like the socials and things like that. But other than that, I don't think there was much to it. Again, with the, like Ruben said, the comedic bit at the end. Like, I don't think it was that comedic, but it was something that they added that was all right. Yeah.
So I'm planning to do a rugby episode with an ex-Warrington Wolves player who now works for the Warrington Wolves Charity Foundation. And I am planning to inspire my audience to get involved in the sporting world. My question is to you, do you think it would be appropriate for me to include content that may entertain an audience in a podcast that I am trying to mainly inspire? Would this be appropriate? Can I have your opinions on this? Keep it brief with this.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with entertaining, it keeps people engaged, and then you can hit them with the inspiring, and it's a nice package at the end of the day. So yeah.
Jake?
I completely agree. I think it's relevant to the podcast. I think it would be a nice addition to use. I agree.
Charlotte?
Yeah,
Elliot?
it's always good to entertain, so I think it would help retain audience attention better.
Okay, Elliot?
I definitely think if you don't make it entertaining, I think your audience are going to think that the sport is not entertaining, and it's not
I agree.
worth the time.
Yeah. Okay. And final point is I want you to listen to a section of this interview and give me your pointers and give me your thoughts on it. So,
To Liverpool.
Speaking of their background, your mates. Robbie, in these podcasts, when I'm talking to you guys, you elite sportsmen, one of the first things we do is try and get an understanding of their background.
Okay.
To understand what made them and where they came from and what went underneath the bonnet to create this elite sportsman. Now, your background was obviously Toxteth.
Yes.
People like me will know Toxteth from the early 80s with the Toxteth riots, and that will be an ignorant point of view because I'm sure it's famous for other things than just the Toxteth riots. But that was your background, and that's where you came from. So walk me through what created you.
I think you're spot on. I think when people talk about Toxteth, from certainly from where I was from, I mean, it wasn't the most well-to-do place, but it's literally probably about a mile from the city centre of Liverpool, and I'm a real Liverpool lad. Bit of a tough upbringing. My mum and dad had split up. I'd never really lived with my dad, and I'm not going down the realms of I want everyone to feel sad for me about my upbringing. My upbringing was brilliant. I was still close to my dad. I was very, very close to my mum, but I lived with my mum. So my upbringing was probably slightly different than the average family, I should say.
Was football and your involvement in it, was it a way out? Was football for you a way out of perhaps not the most ideal of circumstances?
I mean, I know what you're saying and I can get it, but I can see it now. If I go back into the start of my life or the start of my football career, yes, I can see that. But when I'm playing football, there was no chance I was thinking this is a way out. Right. I mean, I played football because I loved the game.
Yeah.
So from that snippet, can I gather your thoughts and opinions on it? Like, what are your dislikes and likes about it? What do you think about the tone and the presentation from it?
It's a bit dry.
I'm not really a fan. I'm not a fan of the delivery. It's the way he talks, the way he delivers things. I think it's very natural, but it's just quite boring.
Do you not think that interview kind of style represents the layout of the podcast, and the tone of it?
I think it does a brilliant job in, presenting that professional and more kind of a more professional tone, and also kind of catering to that older audience of men. And I think a lot of people saying like it's a really dry, all this kind of thing. I think you have to bear in mind that this is the first few minutes of the podcast. These people don't know each other. They're just kind of getting started, all that kind of thing. So I think you'll find as you get further into the podcast, I guarantee that the conversation will get better. But I think from a starting point, it does convey what this podcast is trying to do pretty well.
Yeah. Charlotte?
Yeah, I think for the audience, it might be interesting, especially if you know who exactly is being interviewed. Like, he was used to be a football player, so obviously an older audience will understand more than we do. I think the tone could have been a bit more interesting. It wasn't too attention grabbing. Like, I get it was the start, but if it is the start you want to get the attention quick. But other than that, I think it was suitable for the start of the interview.
Jake?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with what everyone said. I would say that obviously I like the way he made sure that the questions he asked were open-ended. They weren't questions where you could just say yes or no, because that is a big convention for podcasts as a whole. I would agree with the tone being quite mundane and a bit boring. But as Ruben would say, but you've got to bear in mind these people just met each other. They must be very nervous. Obviously, as that podcast progresses, you will probably notice that they're a bit more at ease when they get to know each other a little bit better in a short space of time. But I would definitely say that overall it did suit the podcast, but also there's improvements that need to be made as well.
Okay. Any more points?
No.
All right. Thanks, guys, for tuning into my focus group on podcasts.
With pleasure.
Cheers.
Well done.
Okay.
Done.